Very much, Senator Whitehouse, and I applaud your introducing this amendment. The issue of credit card companies charging Americans outrageously high interest rates is something that has concerned me for a number of years. And we have another amendment which approaches this issue from a kind of different level. But I'm going to work with you, and I think this is a very, very important amendment. The bottom line here is that usury and loan sharking is immoral, it is wrong, and it has got to be prohibited. As I know that Senator Whitehouse and Senator Merkley are more than aware, you have biblical references both in the Old and New Testament to the immorality and the condemnation of usury. And we know as a nation people look askance at loan sharkers. And let's be honest, what are we talking about here? If a financial institution is charging people who are desperate enough to be buying, in many cases, their groceries, their basic necessities on their credit card, and they're being charged 25 or 30% interest rates, if that's not usury, if that's not loan sharking, then I don't know what is. We have introduced legislation that would cap credit card interest rates at 15%. Senator Whitehouse is approaching it in another way, which is an interesting way. But the bottom line is that we have got to deal with the absurd Marquette ruling, which essentially nullifies what every state in the country has done. I think in Vermont, we have usury rates at 12%, doesn't mean anything because of the Marquette decision. So I think, Senator Whitehouse and Senator Merkley, that all over this country, when we have 20% of the people in America now paying at least 20% interest rates on their credit card, those people want action. And when we talk about Wall Street reform and we talk about consumer protection, yes, of course, we need a strong, independent financial services consumer protection agency. But more importantly, we need to address this outrage of high credit card interest rates, and your amendment would do that. So I think the American people want to see action, and I hope that we can work together on your amendment, on my amendment, and give people some relief.
I would add, Senator Sanders, and I thank you very much, and Senator Merkley, for your co-sponsorship of this amendment and your advocacy for it. I would add that I would hope that we could find support for this from the other side of the aisle. Now, I do not see this as an exclusively Democratic issue. And if you look at the arguments that have been made by all of us on the floor just now for it, Senator Sanders spoke eloquently about the Judeo-Christian tradition that informs so much of our civilization and its horror of exaggerated, exorbitant interest rates. For those of our colleagues who are attuned to those traditions, who take their religious principles seriously, they only have to hearken back to the sources of our Judeo-Christian tradition to find that these kind of limits are good and historic. For those of us who are constitutional scholars and historians and are familiar with the doctrine of federalism and the role of the states in protecting their local citizens, the notion of states' rights is one that has frankly been championed by colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Here is an opportunity to express their fealty to that doctrine and to that principle of states' rights. To those who think that 202 years of successful tradition of local regulation of interest rates has value, we can document that this is a recent anomaly. This is a peculiarity that we are correcting. The great sweep of American history over more than 2 centuries is that the states protected their citizens properly and well. Anyone who cares for consumers in their states, local consumers, up against huge credit card companies that keep you waiting on the phone for hours when you have to try to file a complaint, whose offices are in another state or in another country. Sticking up for your local citizens is something I think we should all be prepared to agree to. And finally, for those of us who have local banks, community banks, Main Street banks, who are domiciled in our home states, why should they suffer the disadvantage of having to compete against these huge, rapacious credit card companies and Wall Street banks and be subject to their state's law, but have this loophole allow the monster banks, the gigantic banks, to take advantage of consumers in this way. I think you can look at this amendment from a whole variety of perspectives, and the principles that it stands on are ones that many of our colleagues on the other sides of the aisle have supported and championed over the years.
I might just chime in at this point and say that really, in terms of the discussion I saw at the state level in Oregon, this is a bipartisan discussion because it is indeed deeply rooted in traditions and wisdom that extends back not just generations, but thousands of years. And indeed, time after time after time, the leaders and the philosophical and the religious leaders, as well as political leaders, saw the damage that was done to the foundations of society from extraordinarily high interest. And I think it goes back to understanding that the strength of a society is in the strength of its families. And you do not build strong families when wealth is stripped away by usurious interest rates, by extraordinary interest rates, rates that exceed by many, many times the earnings on interest that a family can get by putting their money into a bank, lending their money into the financial system, very small return, but borrowing out of that financial system, very, very high charges. So if our goal is to build families, then this has all the wisdom in the world. And I certainly want to note that the other aspect of this that really helps tie together Democrats and Republicans is that it is an issue of local control. And there was never a moment when this chamber, or our chamber just a few yards from here, the House chamber, proceeded to say, no, we are going to take away states' rights to control their own interest rates on cards. There was never a moment like that. Such a law was never passed. And indeed, so you have not just the fact that federal law has trumped state law, but has trumped it without any deliberate act of Congress, and in the most bizarre of fashions. And so I should think that the reach in favor of building strong families, building strong communities, and local control will be high. And I certainly look forward to a bipartisan effort to pass this legislation.
If I can pick up from the senator from Oregon, the reason for thousands of years that religious leaders and philosophers have condemned usury, which is really what we're talking about today, is that it is basically immoral, according to every major religion on earth, to tell a desperate person who is in need of a loan that I'm going to give you this loan, but I'm going to charge a very, very high interest rate. So that is condemned by every religion, major religion on earth, as well as every great writer that I can think of who addressed that issue. What I would like to do, I suggest to my friend from Rhode Island, is I just want to, for a moment, read some of the emails that I received from Vermont dealing with this issue that we are attempting to address. You're dealing with it one way, I'm trying to deal with it more in a national way, but we're both together trying to address this. Let me just give you a couple of emails that came to me over the last couple of months. So this is from Jeffrey from the state of Vermont. Quote, I was one of those guys who failed to read the fine print. A couple of years ago, my credit card payment got lost in the mail. By the time I had realized what had happened, they charged me a $45 late fee and then spiked my interest rate up to 35%. At the time, I was in good standing with them. I desperately tried to get this back on track, but after 10 or 12 months of making these crazy payments, I had to make a choice. Lose my transportation to work, lose my house, I'm a father of 4 beautiful children, or stop paying on the credit card. Now, my credit card report has suffered greatly, and even though it has been over a year, they still harass me almost daily. This situation has affected every part of my family and my life, end of quote. Jeffrey from Vermont. This is Ronald from Colchester, Vermont. Quote, I am writing about my city credit card, and I should point out, as my friend from Rhode Island well knows, that the 4 largest financial institutions in this country issue 66%, 2/3 of the credit cards in this country. I am writing about my city credit card. My interest rate went from 12% to 29.9% overnight. I phoned them and was told it was not just myself paying that rate, but everyone pays that rate. How can credit card companies let you make purchases on your account for a moderate interest rate and just mysteriously move to 29.9% overnight? I hope you're able to pass your law to restrict credit card companies from abusing their power over their customers, end of quote. And I've got many emails, and I'm sure you have as well. So the bottom line is, what we are saying is we intend to end this outrageous practice on the part of huge banks who are ripping off the American people. And what Senator Whitehouse is trying to do is say, let us go back to the Federalist principles of this country, where states have established their own interest rate caps, and let's enforce that. We are taking it in a little bit different position, but both of us together are going to do everything we can to end this outrage. And I applaud the senator from Rhode Island for his hard work on this.
Well, let me thank Senator